Hello. So today's lecture, we are going to discuss about the World War and labor movement. So World War, of course, there were two World Wars, but we'll be majorly focusing on the First World War because look, and most of the poets which we discuss drawn inspiration from First World War rather than Second World War. Then we are going to deal it as two separate things, World War and labor movements. But when it comes to exams, there are rare cases where they can be asked together, but most of the time they are asked separately. So I would be discussing them separately, but you just have to combine them. That's all. So World War, I mean, I don't know where to start about the World War. If we are talking about how it happened and all that, it will be an entirely a different lecture. And, I do not want to get into that. And I am confident that, you would have learned it in your history classes. But, so as the title suggests, it was the World War, where, a large number of countries were involved. Almost all countries of Europe was involved in one way or the other, and European colonies were involved. That comprises almost of everything of the world, and some other countries were involved in the World War as well. Um, and this one of the things we need to understand from this war was it led to a lot of death that it's that's redundant. So of course, when there is a world war, like people are going to die everywhere, so that's common knowledge. And it had a significant, not just a death, it had a significant emotional impact on people. Like the way people saw life was very different, because death was everywhere. There was news of death. So your neighbors dying, your relatives dying, and so on. So that changed people quite a lot, and that changed the overview of people. So that is the most important thing. Like these had not just a historical, these are not to be seen as historical events, but they had a significant impact on the society, right? And so that is the most important thing when we speak about the First World War. Also Second World War, much more severely, but for us, First World War is the most important thing. So in the First World War, had a significant impact on writing. So some of the writers were clearly against the war. W.B. Yeats' "Prayer to My Daughter" can be Easter, 1916. Some, W.B. Yeats, you can see that, at least some of the poems are clearly against the war. And so many other poets of the time focused on how, the kind of tragedy that war brings in, right? So T.S. Eliot, if you take into some of his works, and also all the poets, all the poets have written at least one or two poems about war, right? If not many. So people like W.B. Yeats have written much more. So that is about anti-war sentiments. And during the Second World War, which we do not discuss in detail, but during the Second World War, there were some poets called as war poets. Like, they wrote primarily about the war, right? So that is, Wilfred Owens is one big name, which pops up in my mind. So anti-war sentiment, what we call as anti-war sentiment, so that is clearly writing against war is it's ubiquitous among modern writers. And another concept is realism. So realism not in terms of style, realism not in terms of the way things are presented, but they are going to speak about the hard truths, right? So modern writers are going to be, so they all speaks about hard truths which people, do not usually accept in the public, right? Whether it is about the old age, whether it is about the death, whether it is about the degeneration of life. So the hard truths are presented in front of us in the modernist writings. And so that is again, so a ubiquitous feature of modernist writings. And so that is again an influence of World War. Then we have the concept of degeneration. So degeneration, let me give example of W.B. Yeats again. He called youth as dying generation. So why did he call youth as dying generation? Dying generation here is about so it means that it's not the physical degeneration he's talking about, physical death he's talking about, but the death of morality, right? So they're not doing anything significant. They're just involved in physical activities which has no impact on anything. So this degeneration is primary idea of, so degeneration in the sense, the values are so they are vanishing, they are no more there, they are so they are slowly declining. And this is one idea which you can see both in W.B. Yeats and T.S. Eliot quite a lot. And so you can take example of any of their poems, and so you'll have enough materials to write about the degeneration and meaninglessness. So and the here is where modernists and postmodernists differ. Modernists speaks about the meaninglessness of life, whereas postmodernists accept the meaninglessness. So they embrace the meaninglessness. So modernists are concerned about how things are meaningless. Like, so things are happening and it has no impact and whatsoever. Things are, what is the meaning of death when, millions are dying every day? So so the meaninglessness was very popular, during the modernist movement. And existentialism. Existentialism is a response to the fear towards meaninglessness. Existentialism is acceptance of meaninglessness. Yes, it is meaningless. So what? Right. So Sartre is considered to be a existentialist, prominent existentialist, French philosopher and writer Jean-Paul Sartre, wrote about it. Then postmodernist Albert Camus, right? Another French philosopher who wrote Myth of Sisyphus, where he defended that, just because that, like, things are meaningless doesn't mean that, it doesn't have any utility, right? So meaningless things might have utility, even emotional utility as well. So at one hand, modernist writers fearing for meaninglessness, so they are scared that, okay, things are losing meaning. And existentialists who are embracing it and it saying that, yes, things are meaningless, so what? So these are some of the things which you can notice as a response to the war, which was present. Then you see that, fragmentization, like, war. uh, so you can ask a question how fragmentization is related to war. Not a direct relevance, but when, so the people's minds are fragment because of the war. And when people's mind are fragment, their writings will be fragment, tend to be fragment as well. So fragment narrative owes its origin, to war. So fragmentization is another thing which was present. And the sense of loss, right? So the sense of loss is also largely voiced by modernist poets. So these are the things which you can say are the impact of war on modern poetry. Now let us go into the labor movements. So labor movements are, I mean, so you can call it in whatever the name you want, but they are primarily Marxist movements. So so social consciousness was very prominent after after there was this movement of Marxism. So until then, you can say that social consciousness was only with certain people, and majority of the people were not involved in discussion about, excuse me, uh, discussion about society. And suddenly, because of Marxism, like things became popular, and everyone were involved in the conversation about society. And everybody's values were given into consideration. Everybody was, so socialism primarily speaks about social equality, right? So the lives and struggles of everyday life, working class population, and the lower class population was considered only because of these labor movements or Marxist movements. So naturally, because of Marxist literature, so there was significant, Marxist, Marxist movement led to Marxist literature. And Marxist literature, like, two very important examples of Marxist literature is Anton Chekhov, Russian playwright, who wrote plays about the social reality, about how, there needs to be certain equalities in the society. And Bertolt Brecht, of course, he was a Marxist, leader in Germany. He is also a playwright who was significant during this movement. So there is a large, a large bouquet of Marxist literature which was present during the time. And some people even argue some of George Orwell's writing is Marxist, but so it is not true. But you can defend the argument that it is, right? It is not true actually. So, but George Orwell, some of his writings voiced the concerns of Marxism, but he was never, directly, supporting Marxist reign or something. So, Marxist literature was became prominent because of the labor movements which were present. And with this, what happens is, not just working class population, other members of society were also empowered. And one major shift which you find here is feminist literature. Feminism, the first wave of feminism and the second wave of feminism were largely powered by labor movements. And second wave of feminism, especially first wave of feminism, focused on voting rights, suffrage movement we call it. And the second wave was majorly about social equality, like treatment of the genders. So Virginia Woolf and Simone de Beauvoir are the two major names. Virginia Woolf in the first phase and Simone de Beauvoir in the second phase, largely led, of course, not the first phase and second phase exactly, but you can say that early and later, we can say early feminist was Virginia Woolf, later feminist was Simone de Beauvoir, so who spoke about gender inequality and women empowerment. Then we talk about diversity and minorities writing. So when you speak about, since we are majorly speaking about English writing, Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou are the two names which comes to our mind. So two racial minorities, that is, they were all they were both racial minorities, and their writing impacted large number of people. uh, so, but this is just, we are talking about mid 20th century, but later part of 20th century, a large, I mean, so this was not related, restricted to only certain minorities, so there were others. Um, one example can be Salman Rushdie. So Salman Rushdie is British, but of Indian origin. So his writings are, of course, it's a very significant piece of literature. So yeah, I mean, these became popular because of, like, labor movements. So, totally, okay, so these are the two things, World War at one side and labor movements. Now, these two converge when it comes to impact. So when we speak about impacts, remember, it's not just for, World War or labor movement, but, so both of them had impact on modern writings, to an extent. So that is, writing became more politically conscious. So, writing is not just an act of, presenting, it's also a political action. So, writing became much more politically engaged and politically, excuse me, politically educated, and removing the restrictions in terms of forms and style. We have largely spoken about it, and what forms and styles were implemented by modernist writers, and how their style, prose was more poetry like and poetry was more prose like and things like that. Then another set of restriction is the boundaries in terms of boundaries in terms of ideology, boundaries in terms of nationality. All these things were taken away. I mean, slowly removed, and it became, so writing became universal, and it is, we read a British writer, we read an American writer, they read Indian writer, and so on. So things became much more global in nature. So then people strongly spoke about the social concerns, like and so social and political concerns became very important in modern writings, and World War as well as labor movements had its fair share of influence on it as well. So I hope this gives us enough information about how World War and labor movements influenced modern writings. Thank you very much.